Well, I am so excited to have Noelle Salazar here, the author of The Flight Girls, which is a historical fiction book about the Women Air Force Service Pilot Program, also known as the WASP program from World War II. Thank you so much for doing this interview with us.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for giving me a reason to put clothes on. And I'm wearing sweats though, so I'm halfway dressed.
Nice. I put makeup on, which is like a once a year kind of a thing. So
got that.
So I just really loved your book, and I love when books make me want to learn more about what I read about, and your book definitely did that for me. But before we get into the book, could you just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Let's see. I've lived in the Pacific Northwest all my life. I love it here. I love the rain. I love when it doesn't rain. But it's really hard for me to write when it's sunny out. So I actually enjoy the doom and gloom and gray, though it is way less than people think. I'm a wife. I've been married for 14 years this summer, and we have two amazing kids that are way too smart for me. And especially the little one that's like having to do online schooling right now. And oh my, that is something else. And yeah, I've been reading like forever. I love stories. I've always loved stories. And getting to do this job is a serious dream come true, because I really didn't know how to do it or how to make it happen. And so this book kind of made it happen, and so I'm pretty much living my best life right now. Pretty happy, except I'm stuck in my house, but but I kind of need to be here anyways to write things, so it's all good.
Nice. And now, what did you do before you wrote your book?
Several things. When I first graduated high school, I enlisted in the Navy. Kind of didn't know what to do with myself. And actually I was going through something this morning, and I found my little hat that I wore in boot camp. And so I actually got discharged from boot camp because I had an injury and they didn't want to fix it. And so they kicked me out, but in a very nice way. But I was a medical receptionist for a really long time, for about 15 years. And actually, I wrote the entirety of The Flight Girls on my lunch hour and before I started work. Pretty much the entire book, the first draft anyways, was written sitting at my desk at work. So
that's awesome. Well,
yeah.
I'm glad you had that job.
Me too. And my boss, he was so supportive. Like, he would send me these writing articles, and he was like, so and he just was supportive. He really encouraged me to go after it and do it. And he's come to a couple of my events and made sure he bought the book. And so, yeah, I mean, I was in a really great place to be trying this thing that I didn't have any idea would go anywhere. So it was a good experience.
Awesome. And one last thing, how old are your kids?
Oh, gosh. I have to think. 7 and almost 16.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah.
It's a little different homeschooling ages or distance learning.
Yeah. Well, and for my son, who's the older one, like, he's fantastic. Like, he just does his stuff and he's on top of it. And we check in with him, of course, but he is on it. He's always really been all about his schoolwork. So that's great. But she's really just precocious. And so that's super fun. I have to like gird my loins the mornings we have to do it. I'm just like, okay, we're going to get through this. Yeah, it's a thing. But
yes, I could talk about our distance learning for hours and the troubles and woes.
Not fun. It's not horrible, but I mean, there's starting to be some like kind of fighting against it, and I get it, because it's like, it feels like you're home for summer, and yet mom's making you sit at the kitchen island learning, math and stuff. So we've kind of had to give a little in areas just because I can't take it. So we'll see how that goes in the fall, if there's school in the fall.
Yes, I'm feeling ya.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
So now tell me why you Well, first tell us about the book and why you wanted to write about this.
So I wanted to write about it because I've always loved World War II history. My grandfather fought in the war in the Pacific, and my Nana was the feistiest military wife probably there ever was. She was like not even 5 feet tall, and just, she had 4 kids that she had to move because he was a career Marine. And she was a tough lady, and I revered them. My book's actually dedicated to the 2 of them. They were amazing. They had this group of friends that they'd had since that era. And so there was sort of a romance in a weird way to anything that had to do with World War II. And I ate up the history of it. I loved the details, but you never heard about the women unless it was like the women at home. And so when I found the story, which I happened to be at my aunt's house for Easter one year, and she just had these 2 books sitting there, and she was studying to be a docent at our Museum of Flight. They were just going to have this new exhibit on the WASP. And I saw these books. One was like kind of a glorified picture book with pictures of these women, sitting on the wings of warplanes, and they're made up, and they look so sassy. And I was just enamored with them. I had to know who these women were and what they were doing. And so in this one particular book, there was just little stories, little tidbits of things they did. And I came to this one, and it was about Cornelia Fort. And she was actually a civilian pilot training airmen recruits on Oahu, and was in the air when the Japanese flew in. And she was actually the first American pilot to see the Japanese fly in. And that one little tiny story out of all of these little stories was the thing. That was it. I needed to write a book, even if it was just for myself. I had to write the story. I needed to know a version of the story. And so I just created these people, taking little bits of history that I found, and just created this story, and that I loved personally. So I didn't know what I was doing with it or what I was going to do with it. Thankfully, that turned out pretty well. But I needed to write it. I needed to know, even if it was just like me telling it, I needed to know what happened to these women and what they did. And the more I read, the more I was just so enamored with them in that time period, because what a time period to live through anyways. It was just this, and especially, on US soil, we didn't see a lot of it. So I thought it was just very interesting to read about these women and this thing that they did that was super brave, and that they didn't necessarily, get paid as they should have been. So I wrote it because I had to. I don't know. I was compelled to. I couldn't not. So, yeah.
Yeah. So give us kind of a little description of the book and, the characters. And
yeah. So it's about a young woman whose only goal in life really is to own an airfield, particularly the one that she learned to fly on. She comes from a wealthy family and cares nothing for it. She wants to be her own woman, and which was very different from other women at that time. Even her friends, a lot of her friends were, get married, have kids, and she just did not want that. So it's about Audrey and her years during the war, and her camaraderie with these groups of women that she finds herself a part of, that have not necessarily a common goal, but a common goal in life, but have a commonality with her and who she is as a person. And it's about bravery and friendship and love, because love and strength and just all that. I never thought I would write a historical fiction. I was always into kind of reading romantic comedy type books, but I love that feisty protagonist that does the thing you don't expect her to do, or is just loyal. That's what I really like about Audrey, is that she's incredibly loyal, not just to other people, but to herself. And so it's a book about that. It's about a lot of things, but I think mostly it's just about strength in women. And that's very important to me. And that's been a big part of my life.
Yes, I loved feeling like I was participating in their friendships. That was something that, you know, playing sports in high school and junior college, that's something you just forge these bonds. And I felt like I was back in those relationships reading.
Yeah. Yeah, I was a gymnast in junior high and high school, and it's funny because I was always sort of afraid of other girls. I was I was never the popular girl in school. I was really awkward. I had really big teeth and really dumb hair, and I was the third girl out of three girls. And I always had the hand-me-downs that were so terrible. And so I always just felt awkward and like I didn't belong. And then when I joined the gymnastics team, I found like my people, right? So I had this group, and even though I didn't, I would leave practice and go into our school day, and I'd sort of lose that for a little bit, and then we'd join, again at the end of the day, and there they were again. And it was it was comforting, and it kind of made me more secure in who I was. And then after high school, you lose that if you don't go on to like college sports or something like that. And so I did lose that. And that's part of the reason I enlisted in the Navy, because I was just seeking, inclusion again. And I found it in this enormous barracks filled with girls from all over the country. My experience there was amazing, even though I didn't get to stay. It was, I have really funny stories just from being in boot camp because it's a wild ride. And then I had to leave there and I lost it again. And then I became an NFL cheerleader, and there I got it back again. But I was always sort of afraid of women because I was like, she's really pretty and I'm not that, and she's really successful and I'm not that, and where do I belong? And it was just like, I just belong. I belong in this group because women are inclusive and they are supportive. And so it was so fun to get to write versions kind of my friends. It felt like that was the most natural part of the writing experience for me in this book, was getting to write those exchanges, because I totally identified with those exchanges.
Yeah, no, it was great. And I had never heard of the WASP program before.
Yeah.
So it was so eye-opening. I've actually been reading some books about the British women who were spies. And I mean, it's just so inspiring to hear or to learn of all of these heroic women, just people. I mean, how you kind of talked about your research and everything, but what were some of the things that the historical facts that you kind of caught your eye about what these women in the WASP program did?
Well, the big one was that they weren't granted veteran status. Like they weren't given military benefits, which they were out there risking their lives. Yeah, they weren't, getting fired at necessarily, or they weren't on the front lines in the war. Though they were getting fired at because they did tow targets behind the planes for live artillery from the ground. They were shooting, the men were shooting machine guns up at these targets they were towing. And sometimes they missed the targets and hit the planes. So it was a scary thing they were doing. But so yeah, that they didn't get military benefits was mind-blowing to me. And if they happened to die or get injured, their friends or family had to pay for their bodies to be returned home. And then there was just like a lot of the stories of the women, things that they did. There's one, I think I added in the book. Yeah. So there's two women and they're trying to deliver two planes. And they're calling down to the tower to get clearance to land, and the whoever's in the tower is telling them to get off the line because they're trying to land these two planes because they think it's two men and that these girls are playing a trick. So finally, of course, they landed the planes. There's also a story about some general or sergeant or something who asked a couple of women to go fly one of the bombers because his men didn't want to fly it. They were afraid of it. They didn't like how it flew. So these girls go marching out on the tarmac and climb up in the bomber, and these male pilots are watching them go and like, what are they doing? And then they couldn't say anything because those girls went up there and, were doing whatever in this plane, making it look so easy. And so they couldn't say anything after that. But and then there's sad things. There was a story of one of the women. She wasn't getting along with the mechanic during training, and he put sugar in the gas tank, and she ended up crashing and dying. But yeah, it's more the stories, the things that these women did and went through, and that I really was just like, oh my gosh, like that's what made me want to tell this story. Even if I couldn't add everything in that I found, it was just amazing to me that these things happened and we don't even know about it. It's not in any history books, which is crazy. So if anything, I love that people are reading it and saying that they're going to look up information about it now. And I've since gone to the museum. There's a National WASP Museum in Sweetwater, Texas. And last year, they do a annual homecoming reunion for the WASP. And so I went last year and I got to meet 2 of the WASP. And that was spectacular. They were just still very feisty and sassy and full of stories. And it was really, really special. So, yeah.
Yeah. And now, did they volunteer to be part of this program?
Yes. So letters were sent out by Jackie Cochran, who was like a famed aviatrix at the time. And her and Nancy Harkness Love, they put this program together along with General Arnold, who helped them out. They had both separately tried to put programs together, and it just never was happening. And then finally he was able to bring them both in. Apparently they didn't really get along very well, but they worked together to bring this program together. And then Jackie sent out letters. She just looked up like where the pilots were. And in fact, there was more women that had pilot's license than driver's license at that time. So she sent all these letters out, thousands of letters out. And then whoever wanted to answered, this call. And they had to have like 500 flying hours and a couple other things. They had to be a certain height. Not everybody was. And so they volunteered for this.
Yeah, I find it, I would have been terrified going, because they had to test some of these planes, right? I mean,
yeah. And they were falling apart. Like some of them had literally seen war and been brought back, and they're like, we're going to patch this up and you're going to go fly it and try and knock that wing off. Like I don't want to do that. And, they've got parachutes on and everything else, but these are not, I don't know, not today's planes. And some of them were like right off the line, they're brand new and hadn't even been flown yet. So who knows what's going to happen. So yeah, it was tricky business. I don't know. No, thank you.
Yes, that wouldn't have been for me. So one of the things also that, for me, I had to find more information. And so I ran into a documentary on Violet Cowden, and she's actually from South Dakota, which is bordering Minnesota. So we kind of claim them as our own as well.
Actually, I have family in North Dakota. So the Dakotas are very special to me.
Yeah, nice. And that's just what I love is these brave women. I mean, it's just so cool. And how cool it for you to be able to talk to the 2 people that you got to see.
Yeah, that was a dream come true. A dream I didn't even know I had at the time. Like I was just writing this story. And this was, 9 years ago now that I started this story. And it's so funny. So when I went out there to Texas, that was actually the second time I went out. At the first time, after I got my first round of edits back from my editor, I hadn't even known that the museum existed at that point. And then I found it during one of my many research sessions, because when I started, I didn't find that much online. And like every year I went back to look for more information, I would find more information. And so at that time I found out there was this museum, and my husband, bless his heart, was like, you need to go there, right? And I was like, yes, I do. And so I went, and one of my sisters came with me, and we just, I just walked around. And actually, so the plane that Audrey loves in Hawaii that she calls Roxy, they have that exact plane in their museum. And I was just like, she exists. Like it was just this silly moment, but it was like, oh my gosh, I wrote this and there's the plane. And so that was really cool. But yeah, so I went back for the homecoming reunion, and they had actually invited me, which was really, really cool. The museum invited me. And so I had a little table. And the really neat thing too was, well, there was a couple things. So first off, they had a ceremony for a couple of the women that had passed in that last year. So they had a little ceremony and spread their ashes, which was really, really special to be a part of that. And then the year before, I had actually got to have a phone call with one of the WASP. I met someone on Twitter who, her grandmother was one of the WASP, and she had just published a book about getting her grandma's the rights to have her buried at Arlington. And so she connected with me, and she ended up connecting me with Jane Doyle, who had been a WASP. And so we had a phone conversation, and she was, again, feisty, full of stories, so willing to talk, just absolutely lovely, reminding me of my Nana, which is another reason why this era was so, I just wanted to write about it, because it just reminds me of my grandparents. And so, and getting to talk to these women reminds me of my grandma. So, so we talked, and I really just wanted to know, about the everyday, like when you woke up, what did you do? And before you went to bed, what did you do? Because in the books and online, you get facts, like the same facts over and over again, but you don't get the personal experience so much. And so she gave me that. And so I was at this homecoming reunion, and I had left my table for a minute, and I had come back, and there was this woman standing there. So I kind of, hurry over and sit down, and we're chatting for a few minutes before I noticed she's wearing like this enormous button. I don't know how I didn't see it. And there's a picture of a woman, and it says Jane Doyle. And I'm like, do you know Jane Doyle? I'm like, is she here? Like, it was her daughter. And Jane had passed 3 months before. And I was just, but we had this moment, and she teared up when I told her about my conversation with her mom, and I'm a mess. And I started this book, just like I said, it was just a story, but it became so personal to me. And the more I get to talk about it and tell people about it, I feel like it gave me a mission. So when I get to talk about my book, it's not even, it's like, you don't have to buy my book, but go look up these women. Like, they're amazing. That's what I feel like about it. It gave me this really cool thing that I get to tell people about. And so many people know about them now. And I've actually gotten emails from family members of the WASP that are just, this sounds just like the stories my mom used to tell. And that is, there is nothing better than that.
Yeah, that's very special. Yeah. And then now in the 70s, I can't remember, did Jimmy Carter, what did he do in regards to the WASP?
I'm trying to remember that too. He gave them veteran status.
Okay.
He granted veteran status. Yeah, finally, in the 70s. That's bad.
Yes. Yeah. And then I believe in 2009, they received the Congressional Medal of Honor.
Yeah, from Obama.
Yeah. So that's awesome. And I am so thankful that you've told this story, and that I found your book, and I just love sharing things that I've read and excited about. And so thank you for helping tell the people in our area about your book. So
yeah, thank you.
And so now I've also hear that you're writing another book. What can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so like I said before, I never thought I would write historical fiction. And so once I wrote this book, I was like, okay, yeah, done, right? But that's not how it works. When you do well, then they want you to write more in the genre. And I was like, okay. And so I had a couple ideas, but nothing that was really resonating with me so much. And then a friend of mine, darn her, sent me an article, and she's like, please write this story. And it was this tiny little article about these two sisters, Dutch sisters. They lived in Haarlem in the Netherlands. And when they were 14 and 16, they joined the resistance, and they ended up, their job was they had several jobs, but their main job was to seduce Nazis and kill them. So they became assassins at a very young age. And I was just like, I'm all over it. Like, I have got to write this story. And so I ended up finding this woman who is from there, and she befriended them for the last like 20 years of their lives. And she wrote like a true telling of, you know, what their life was. But so I'm writing a story inspired by those two women, and it's been really fun. It's a little different, like a little darker maybe. But again, it's these, you know, it's women and working together and doing this thing that you don't expect women to do. And yeah, so I'm really excited about it.
Awesome. And so do you have like kind of a date of release?
I don't. It's probably going to be 2021, which I'm kind of thankful. At first I was like, darn, that's so far away. But now I'm like, oh, thank goodness, because who knows what is happening in the world right now. So it'll probably be 2021. I'm still trying to get through this first draft, and I just keep finding more information. So I'm like, ooh, I got to add that in too. And yeah, so that's the thing about historical fiction is there's actual fact that you can like dig up and then add it to, and so it becomes pretty exciting. But then it also messes with your timeline, which I just had this really fun experience, which was not fun, where I was like, oh shoot, that just ruined my entire like timeline, and now I have to shift it, and oh my gosh. Writing is fun.
Well, I'm so thankful for you to do this interview. I truly am thankful you wrote the book and introduced us to these women. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you for saying that. Thank you for having me again and for making me get dressed and be a normal person in society. I appreciate it. And I'm glad you enjoyed the book.
You can find Noelle's book at IndieBound, Apple Books, Barnes & Noble, and Amazon. And I really hope you'll check that out because it's a great book.